To understand everything about the creation and use of atomic bombs, you can read my book, The Atom as a Weapon, which is available for sale on WeClap and also on Amazon through the link in the description and the QR code on the screen. If you want to buy this copy here autographed by me for you, just send an email to saladeguerra.com with your postal code so I can calculate the shipping cost. New chapter of the Ave Brás saga. For those interested in defense in Brazil, or at least have read something about AVE's legal disputes, Brás, one of our pioneering defense industries and the main hub for missile development in Brazil. Today I'm going to tell you what happened and also why Ave Brás ended up in this situation. But what happened? Today it was reported that none other than Joesley Batista, owner of the JBF meatpacking plants, who has millions, in fact, $1 billion. He has very large investments in the United States. They say he's also controlling the meat market in the United States. Joesley Batista is going to take on a large part of Ave Brás's debts. Joesley Batista would make an investment, or is going to make an investment, of 300 million reais in Ave Brás, together with other investment funds. So, just lifting the company out of financial chaos, out of the labor debts it currently has, and Brás then would be run from now on with these investments and also a lot of federal money, which now seems like it will finally start trickling into the company. But if you don't know what Ave Brás is, that's no longer a problem, because today I'm going to tell you what this company is. Ave Brás Brazilian Aviation, or Brazilian Airplanes, was created in 1900. It was one of the first private initiatives carried out by former students of ITA, the Aeronautics Institute of Technology. 3 students, including engineer João Verde, the biggest name of Ave Brás to this day, João Verde. In April 1961, they founded Ave Brás with the goal of building, developing, and constructing a small training and light liaison aircraft for the Brazilian Air Force called Falcão. This project did not move forward, but the company took a very different path from the original plan in a short time, because a few months after Ave Brás was founded, none other than Yuri Gagarin also set foot in Brazil. He had just completed his space flight, in fact, in the same month of April 1961, when Ave Brás was opened here in Brazil. Gagarin then went on a world tour, and he ended up here. And he went to Brasilia, where he was awarded the Order of the Southern Cross by then-President Jânio Quadros. What did Jânio Quadros do? Less than 24 hours after giving this medal to Gagarin, Jânio Quadros signed the executive order that gave rise to the Brazilian space program. The thing is, Brazil didn't have much infrastructure in 1961 to really support this new framework. Created the Brazilian space program. Therefore, the Quadros government turned to a brilliant Brazilian, perhaps the most brilliant Brazilian of the 20th century, who is still with us, at almost 102 years old. Professor Dr. Fernando de Mendonça, who at that time was still an officer in the Brazilian Air Force and had just finished his doctorate at Stanford University, where he formed several friendships with American professionals, who went on to form NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the American Space Agency. Therefore, Fernando de Mendonça had very good connections at NASA. And he was able to bring to Brazil a whole package of benefits, which included several projects, rocket blueprints of various categories. It was also Fernando de Mendonça's guidance that led to the opening, the creation of the Barreira do Inferno rocket launch base, there in Natal, in Rio Grande do Norte. And Fernando de Mendonça achieved all this precisely by turning Natal into a listening post. Tracking antennas were installed in Natal to track the flight from the rockets that were launched from Florida, particularly the rockets from the Apollo program, which would continue in the following years. So Fernando de Mendonça, with all that material in hand, had a meeting with this young engineer, João Verde, and then handed him the blueprints for a rocket called Arcus. It was a small meteorological sounding rocket. And then, with the instruction for João Verde to develop a Brazilian version of that rocket, the project was handed over to him. And João Verde, president of Brás, turned that into the Sonda 1 in 1965. The first rocket of the Sonda family was Brás, the pioneering company in Brazil in the creation and manufacturing of seamless tubes, which are essential for making a rocket. So the technological innovation that was brought into the industrial base, the Brazilians started from there. Part of this innovation began with Brás. And in the following decades as well, this investment in space science brought countless technological innovations to our industrial base as well. Well, the Sonda 2, which was Brás's second product in the rocket field, flew for the first time in 1969. And now, already with a contract signed with the Institute of Aeronautics and Space, Brás was the main contractor for the development of the last two rockets of this family, each time with greater complexity and more capabilities. The Sonda 3 in 1976 and the Sonda 4 in 1984. This is a rocket that even managed to launch a remote sensing payload into space, the only Brazilian rocket to actually do that. And at the same time that Brás was developing these rockets, it mastered the process of manufacturing solid propellant. Therefore, Brazil becomes one of the rare nations in the world that has complete mastery over the manufacturing of solid propellant. In fact, Brazil is a major producer of sodium perchlorate, which is one of the fundamental components for the manufacturing of this fuel. A component that Iran, for example, does not manufacture. They depend on imports, today mostly coming from China, for the production of solid propellant for their rockets. So what's going to happen? In the early 1980s, alongside the development of the Sonda rocket line, Brás also started paying attention to what was happening abroad. So they realized there was a great opportunity if they followed in the footsteps of another successful Brazilian company at the time, which was Engisa. Engisa was established and grew significantly by meeting the emergency demands of countries at war, in Engisa's case, Libya. And in the early 1980s, the major war that had just broken out was the Iran-Iraq War in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf. Iran was sitting on a mountain of money from oil production, and Saddam Hussein wanted to buy weapons in the short term and as quickly as possible. He would buy anything that was offered to him. Therefore, Brás, taking on some engineers who graduated from IME who had already been working on multiple rocket launcher projects, based and inspired by the Katyushas. And from the Nebelwerfer of World War II, they brought this knowledge to Brás. And in 1982, therefore, the Astros rocket battery was created. For those who don't know, Astros is an acronym that stands for Artillery Saturation Rocket System. So it's a rocket artillery saturation system, okay? And the Astros that came in, that entered into operation in the mid-80s, was sold in large quantities to Iraq and also to Angola, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the Brazilian army itself, to Qatar, to Libya, Malaysia, and also Indonesia in the following decades. But just like the end of the Cold War, in the early 90s, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union killed in Gaza, the end of the Cold War also almost killed Brás. Actually, the contracts for selling the Astros abroad were what kept Vibrasa open, even though it was struggling a lot. Why? Because government investment in defense science and technology went down the drain in the 90s. Every chart you look at will show that it clearly went down the drain in the 90s. The government of Fernando Henrique Cardoso, Lula's government, Dilma's government, all the ones after them didn't invest in this field anymore. So the Brazilian defense industry system was really left begging because state investment dried up. Without state investment, you don't have continuity in research for long-term projects. And you have to agree with me here that rockets, missiles, vehicles, and aircraft are long-term projects. So without the continuity of these investments, it becomes unfeasible for researchers to continue their work. And therefore, many of these researchers may choose more stable opportunities. Where? Abroad. And that's what characterizes the brain drain that Brazil has suffered in recent decades. Well, Brás kept going, kept producing prototypes, kept producing initial products and proposals for new weaponry during this whole period. But it was also harmed, or rather quite limited, let's say handcuffed, by the signing of the International Missile Technology Control Treaty, which Fernando Henrique signed in 1995. And because of this treaty, Brazil can produce missiles with a payload capacity greater than 500 km and a range of more than 300 kilometers. And it's exactly this configuration that the AVTM 300 project by Brás intends to put into operation. This project, up until now, hasn't been embraced by the Brazilian government. It's been carried forward solely with investment from the company itself and a few other companies. But there's also Mansu, which is the anti-ship missile in partnership with the Navy, as well as a Darter, which is an air-to-air missile. It's heat-seeking, right, for targeting by heat, and it's also still at the prototype stage. The company was at this point when, in 2022, the pandemic hit it hard, and with the need to keep everyone at home still on the payroll, it ended up entering court-supervised restructuring. And today, it has a debt of around 570 million reais. Well, in 2024, the company was almost sold to an Australian company called Defentax, an Australian defense company. That contract was never finalized. The Australian government decided not to back Defentax's bid. And then another Chinese company called Norinco also tried to buy it. But again, the purchase was not completed. And now, with this reality of 2026 that we're experiencing, this current reality and international instability here in the Americas, surprisingly as well, and with what appears to be the fall of a traditional geopolitical model that we've been living with and experiencing for decades, then uncertainty started to loom large again on Brazil's horizon. And now, it seems that finally the authorities have woken up and decided that Brás shouldn't go to the grave, that it should be restored. And yes, it is from Brás that it should come. The new generation, so far the supposed new generation of Brazilian missiles. Well, that's it. If you didn't know about this whole story, tell us in the comments if you learned something new now. And if you already knew, let us know what else you can add to this topic in our video today. Tell us in the comments below. If you like this video, then share it with your friends and also give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to Sala de Guerra so you don't miss anything else. I'll stop here. Thank you again for watching. And here's a big hug from Sala de Guerra.